Hello, my name is Christina Long, and it is my sincere pleasure to be able to welcome you to a webinar featuring our great partners at Martin Pringle. Today we have joining us is Danielle Cornejo as well as Zach Wiggins. Thank you guys so much for joining us on this webinar. We appreciate it. We are going to be looking at LLCs and how to remain in compliance. So again, the theme of our topic today is I have an LLC, now what? Before we get started with our content, we do need to do just a bit of housekeeping as it relates to the purpose of this webinar today. So again, in terms of what we're working to do, we really want to be able to share information with everyone. So again, just a little disclaimer that the information provided here does not constitute legal advice. Martin Pringle is a great partner with the Create campaign, and we're very appreciative of them taking the opportunity to help educate, empower, and inform us. So just a little bit about Martin Pringle. Again, they've been a Create campaign partner for many years, and they have 50 lawyers with expertise in a wide range of litigation and transactional practices. What about the Create campaign? We are a nonprofit organization that really works to help urban entrepreneurs in Kansas to launch, innovate, and excel. And real briefly, again, just joining us today is Danielle Cornejo. She's an attorney here. Danielle, thank you for being with us.
Hi, Christina. Thank you for having us. We're excited to be here today.
Absolutely. And with her, alongside her, is Zach Wiggins. Zach, thanks again for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
All right. Well, with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into our wonderful webinar topic. Now that we have an LLC, now what? Before we go too deeply, though, there may be some viewers who are not aware of the benefits of having a structured company within the state of Kansas. Could one of you speak briefly to the benefits of legally structuring a company?
Sure. So I can think of a lot of benefits, but the main three that come to mind is one, the protection from personal liability that you get, and also the pass-through taxation concept, especially in the LLC context, as well as the flexible management options. So essentially you can get the liability protection of a C corporation while also having the flexible management options of a partnership. So there's just a lot of flexibility and a lot of good options available whenever you form an entity with the state. So on the pass-through taxation concept, the reason an LLC is beneficial is because as opposed to a C corporation, that's taxed at the corporate level and then again at the individual level, the LLC is only for pass-through taxation, so it's only taxed once at the member level and you're not subject to the corporate tax. So those are three of the main benefits of doing so. So yeah, but of course there's many more.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much for allowing that. Again, our audience includes those who do have the LLCs, so the terminology of C Corps and things of that nature, that should be pretty familiar to folks here. So now that we understand the benefits of legally structuring, thank you for reminding us of that, remaining in compliance following structuring, that is a very big deal. It's very ideal as well. What are some immediate steps you recommend business owners take regarding organizing their LLC documents for easier access?
Yeah, so once you get your documents put together, you want to keep them all together, because I've worked with a lot of companies that will go out and form their company and they don't really keep track of all their paperwork. So when you ask them, questions like who owns the company, they don't necessarily have the documents or know where the documents are. So keeping those documents is incredibly important. So the first thing we do when we form a company here is we create what we call a minute book, which is a binder with separate tabs for your articles of organization, your tax ID number, your operating agreement, any resolutions or consents or stock certificates or whatever you have. You keep them all in one book, which makes it really easy to, one, know where it is, and two, when you do a resolution or you do your annual meeting minutes each year, it's really easy to just put it in so that you can keep track of, hey, we have a new board member. What did we do 5 years ago? Well, we can go look because it's all in the same packet of information. So keeping everything together is a good idea. And also scanning the records into your computer, keeping them electronically is also a good idea, just in case something happens to the hard copy, that way you have a backup copy. And then, with having the law firm do it, we always keep a copy of everything that we prepare as well. So there's a backup copy as well, but, keeping a few of them so you don't misplace them is a good idea.
Absolutely. When Martin Pringle actually organized or did some organizing work for myself, I've come to very much appreciate that binder. So thank you for sharing that tip, that practical tip for us. Beyond the organization of their documents, what are some recommendations you suggest business owners adopt to make sure they remain in compliance with their LLCs? Danielle, you want to take that one?
Sure. So yeah, it is really important that once you are an entity that's formed through the state, that you take certain steps to remain in compliance. One of those being the filing of the annual reports with the Office of the Secretary of State and paying those annual fees, because you want to keep your status as an entity with the state in order for that liability protection to be there. Aside from that, I generally advise clients to kind of have a yearly checklist in mind. So every year when the annual meeting comes due, hold those annual meetings, or at least document it, and keep good records of those minutes and put them in the minute books that we prepare. And also, make sure you're paying the federal and state income taxes and doing all the things you need to do in order to continue to operate as that business.
That's very good and practical advice. This is helpful to some folks. We were able to actually compile questions based on questions that were submitted to myself prior to this webinar. So thank you all for taking time to, again, not only hit on the theory about LLC ownership, but offer some practical strategies with that as well. So moving on, over time, the capabilities of a company might grow. What are some steps you recommend for LLC owners who are looking to expand their capabilities with their current LLC? How do you do that?
So when you're starting to look into expanding and starting to grow, first thing you want to do is that's when it becomes really, really important to make sure all those documents that Danielle was talking about are in place. Because if you don't have your operating agreement in place before you start bringing in other growth, then it can get really, really hard to fix problems after the fact. So, we've had people that have come to us and, took on some co-owners, and then they wanted the co-owners out of the business. And there's steps that you can do to give yourself that option in the future. But once you give away part of your company, then it's really hard to get it back if you don't have things in place. So you want to make sure you have all the paperwork in place before you sign any actual documents. And then other than that, a lot of times growth from the company, there's obviously, getting with Christina or getting with other groups to talk about a plan to grow. And then usually it comes down to having, capital to be able to do that. So, the main ways you can do that are working with lenders to get loans, even SBA loans or whatever kind of loan you're able to get. And then the other option is looking at, do I have the kind of business that people want to invest in?
Absolutely.
And if they do, then, you can get an influx of capital. You sell off a little bit or a piece of your company, and a lot of money comes in. But, when you start doing that, you start getting into SEC, like securities regulations. So you want to be pretty careful and make sure you know what you're doing before you do that, just to make sure you do it right. And then the other one is, at a certain point, people get their company to a size where it might make sense to just sell your company out to a third party. You might have it grown to a certain point and somebody's willing to pay you a multiple of your sales that you have. And it could make sense for you to go ahead and cash out, sell it, take the money and reinvest it into whatever your new project is going to be. So I'd say that's kind of the pattern that a lot of people follow.
That's really interesting. More and more I've began to receive additional questions about LLCs overseeing a nonprofit organization. So for example, an LLC that's established for profit, they now want to, and have been successful, they now want to kind of branch out and do more community engagement for the public good. And so if people are interested in establishing a nonprofit organization, within their for-profit LLC structure, how does that work? What are your thoughts on the best way to organize this effort, or should it be combined at all?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times they can overlap to a certain extent, but frankly, under Kansas law, the easiest thing to do is just to keep them separate. You have a for-profit business that you run and you try to make money and it pays your bills, and then you have a not-for-profit company that you set up separately, that all the money that goes into that company stays in that company and is reinvested for whatever your mission is. So keeping those separate is definitely the easiest way to go. And frankly, it's not that hard to form a not-for-profit company. It's really easy under Kansas law to just file articles to do that. And then getting approved with the IRS for tax exempt status is also not all that complicated, and frankly not all that expensive if you're at that point that you're wanting to do that. We do have some options for larger corporations that allow a for-profit company to have a charitable mission within it, so you can still make money, but you're doing something for the community good, and you're kind of mixing them up together. But the complexity when that makes sense for that to happen is probably, relatively large companies is where you'd be looking at that. But when you're first starting out on doing that, keeping them separate is a lot cleaner.
Thank you very much for explaining that it might be relatively easy to set up those corporations, the nonprofits in the state. One thing that in research and also in practice, I found the IRS wants to see specific language in those articles of incorporation for nonprofits. So again, just another reason to be able to connect and use our team at Martin Pringle and others for some advice so we can possibly avoid some missteps there. That might be something to consider as well. You also mentioned in your comments about keeping things separate. And so one question that we did have as well is for particularly single member LLCs, let's say you're the only owner of that corporation and you begin to make purchases for your company, but then you want to take a drawdown as an owner as well. And so is there something to be said about keeping business expenses separate from personal expenses or drawdowns as an LLC owner? What would be either of your recommendations there?
Sure. So that's generally one of the first things we advise clients is to obtain a tax identification number for the business, create that separate bank account, and really keep those separate. I know Zach and I have talked about this before, and you want to touch base on?
Yeah, so with disregarded entities, single member LLCs, disregarded entities, what that means is that for state law purposes, you are treated as a separate entity. You have a limited liability company that is separate from yourself, which would imply you need a different bank account. For IRS purposes, they disregard it and treat your company as your person. So your tax return, there's no separate tax return, there's no information reporting, there's nothing, you don't have to do anything with as far as the IRS is concerned, your LLC doesn't even exist. But for liability issues, it very much does exist. So if you want to have that protection and liability that you get from having an LLC, then we usually recommend go ahead and, getting a tax ID number is free, and you just open up a separate bank account and run everything, keep it separate, because if you ever need that separate liability, if you've been paying your personal grocery bills and the business's bills and the car rental and the house payment and all that stuff out of the same bank account, anybody that has a claim against you is going to say, look, they're not treating it as a separate company. They're treating it as their own piggy bank. So everything in there is up for grabs. If you keep it in a separate bank account, then it gives you that limited liability. So, and it's just cleaner. If you want to know how much money is my company making, it's just seems easier to be able to say, well, here's my assets, liabilities, expenses, profit for my company, and here's what I spent at home. So,
and I think if you commingle everything, then you're really losing that huge benefit of limiting your liability to your investment in the company, because if there's no distinction between the company funds and your funds, then essentially all of it's at risk. So I think that that's important to do.
I think that answers that question very, very clearly. Thank you guys for weighing in on that. So in an earlier response, we did hear about, the addition of owners and things of that nature, but I want to drill down on this. This was someone's specific question. So again, going back to if LLC owners, if they want to, after filing their formation documents, go ahead and add additional owners, what is the best way to report such changes?
Yeah, so actually you don't have to technically file anything with the Office of the Secretary of State in order to change the ownership composition of the company. But the first thing you need to do is review your operating agreement and the documents governing your company to make sure that you're taking the steps and getting the votes and approvals needed in order to add that extra member or to even to remove a member. So just make sure that you're complying with your organizational documents and as well as your operating agreement. Where it's actually reported with the state is just on the annual report that you'll be filing with every year. So on the annual report, you list the members of the company that have a certain percentage ownership in the company. So that's where you would kind of report the change of ownership. But in order to actually change ownership, you don't have to file anything.
Oh, that's very interesting to hear. All right, so we've covered a lot of really great information about ownership and compliance. Let's sneak in a tax question. So tax laws around LLCs in Kansas, they seem to have changed just a bit. What are your recommendations for people looking to find out about the impact of tax laws on their LLC?
So yeah, they've changed a lot over the last 5 years or so. So the big change was in 2013, they eliminated pass-through tax. So that essentially meant that if you were an owner of a company, a partner in a law firm, or an owner of anything that passed through an LLC or an S Corp, you didn't have to pay any state income taxes on your business. So for a while, there was a frantic rush to make sure that you were an LLC for that purpose. Well, they got rid of that last year, and it was retroactive to all of last year. So that's gone, and now owners of LLCs or S Corps pay taxes just like anybody else would, at the state level at least. They have recently changed the federal tax level to add in what they call a qualified business deduction, which is essentially if you have an LLC or pass-through income, you get to deduct 20% of that income off your taxes. So you don't have to pay taxes on 20% of what you bring in on top of your other deductions. So it's still really, really beneficial to be an LLC or to be an S Corp. And there's a few differences between the two. You'll probably save a little bit of money by being an S Corp over an LLC, but LLCs are more flexible. So getting into the nitty gritty on how much you'll save between one or the other is definitely something you would want to ask an accountant about to actually see what the numbers are. It does make a difference, but it doesn't make that significant of a difference a lot of times. As far as staying up on it, they, as you can tell, that those are some pretty, wide-ranging, impactful changes. So it's not small taxes where it's like, well, this was deductible and now this isn't. I mean, it's gone, complete 360 to fully taxable, zero tax, back to fully taxable, 20% deduction. So, and it would not be surprising if that continued to change every 4 years or whatever. So it's gonna change a lot, and staying up with it is a lot. So, you can subscribe to news feeds or wires or whatever to stay up on it. Google it, pay attention to the news. You'll usually see it, but if you start having some income, especially if you start having income coming in, then getting an accountant to help you out with it to make sure you're doing it right is usually not an overbearing expense. So that's certainly the easiest way to stay up with it.
Very well, very well. So, okay, granted, we might have asked a little bit of a tax accountant question. We'll definitely pull it back and bring it back to the attorney question. Filing formation paperwork is one step. But what are some other legal documents you recommend that LLC owners be aware of, particularly as it relates to handling negotiation, and in contracting opportunities?
Sure. So I think one of the most often questions that I get relating to LLC formations is whether they need a buy-sell agreement or to have buy-sell provisions in their operating agreement. And that's definitely something you want in place from the outset, because like Zach was talking about earlier, you want those regulations and guidelines in place before you're looking to buy or sell your company. So it's important to make sure you have that. Another thing is, if you have employees, it might make sense to have contracts with the employees, depending on the circumstances. And if you have employees, definitely need an employee handbook. So those are some documents. Another thing that comes to mind is if you're contracting with third parties to provide goods or services to your company or on behalf of your company, you really want to clarify that relationship and get some sort of independent contractor agreement in place with them, because if not, then you could run the risk of them becoming classified as an employee of your company for tax withholding purposes or otherwise. So it's really important to clarify that independent contractor relationship. Some more agreements are maybe non-compete or non-solicitation agreements, depending on the type of work the business does. But those are some items you should keep in mind, and if any of them become relevant, definitely ask questions and seek advisors for assistance. So
Absolutely. Those were great examples of documents. I even had a scenario earlier this afternoon in accepting a credit card payment over the phone, and what were the protections, or what was the legal language necessary between the business owner and the client or the customer in that regard. And so if business owners have questions like that about what kind of legal language or disclaimers that they should be enacting, is that something you all handle as well, advise on?
yeah, definitely. Those are the types of issues we would, listen to and then look into and make sure we're giving the right advice to protect them. So
Absolutely, great. And speaking of protection, one of the final questions that we have is, I've received questions from business owners who are really interested in protecting their ideas as an LLC owner. Are there steps that can be taken to protect an idea that a business owner might have at the conceptual stage? Because again, I know many are fearful of sharing ideas in instances that their ideas might be taken.
Yeah, there's a few things that you can do. One of them, I mean, it depends on what you're trying to protect. If you have a company name and it's that's what you're worried about protecting, or a symbol or something, then you can go ahead and file a trademark. Even before you start your company, you can file for a trademark, and then you have a certain period of time where you need to get your company up and running and actually get it into commerce so you can, lock it in. But you can do that a little bit ahead of time. I'm sure patents have the same rule, but that's rarely what people are asking us about. And then the other big one that I assume a lot of people are talking about are NDAs, or non-disclosure agreements. And those can be very, very useful documents that basically says, hey, I'm going to give you some information, and you promise to use that information for this purpose only, whatever that purpose is, whether it's giving me business advising or consulting, or if it's you're thinking about buying my company and I want to give you all of my accounts and all my bank accounts and all my tax returns and all that stuff. And if you walk away from that deal and don't buy my company, I don't want you going to the news and saying, hey, look at all these tax returns that I have, and making all that information public. So it makes a lot of sense in those situations. So with those, you do have to be a little bit careful, though, because I've heard there are some people, especially business advisors, mentors types, that if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I would like your help with my business idea, I'm not going to pay you anything, I just want you to help me, and before I allow you to do that, I need you to sign this NDA. Well, sometimes the mentors might look at that like, you're asking for my help, I'm not going to go through a several page legal document and figure all that stuff out. So sometimes you just have to trust the other person and just trust that they're not gonna go off on that. You know, as a lawyer, I don't say trust other people very often, but
That's why I smile.
sometimes you have to do that, you know, if you're just asking for advice. But usually if you're doing that, you're not getting into the, you know, nitty gritty of it, like looking at specific code that you're writing or specific financials. Yeah, you're more talking generically of, hey, do you think something like this would work? And not really detailing it out. So it's usually when you start talking actual numbers or actual, you know, software or whatever you're developing, then that's where you might want to look into the NDA.
A little protected. Oh, very, very good. Well, again, we have covered so much ground in this short time. I really appreciate you all taking time to allow us to pick your brains on these items. And I guess the only other remaining question is, Danielle, do you have anything that you would like to share that we have not covered or that you would like to leave LLC owners with?
You know, I would just say to make sure you have your operating agreement and all of those safeguards in place so that you can receive the benefit of the protection from the liability. And also just to, you know, seek advice whenever you need it. Review the documents, be careful in your business operations, because it's easier for us to advise from the outset versus trying to fix things later. So definitely we're here to help if we can in any way.
Wonderful. Zach, do you have anything else that you would like to add?
You know, I think the biggest thing when I see things go wrong, it's, you know, people that don't treat their business like it's a business. You know, it's, you know, when you file those articles of organization or articles of incorporation and you start your own business and you're running it, you need to think of it as a whole separate entity. It's not you anymore. It's not you running the business. It's the business itself. So keep the accounts separate. Keep all the documents separate. Don't forget to document things. Keep track of it, because, you know, if something happens, that's usually where it gets really hard. Is if, well, we haven't really done anything that we needed to do. That's where it gets tricky. So, you know, take it seriously. I mean, you're starting a business and it's going to be wildly successful, and, you know, treat it like that from day one. And then also, you know, there's just so many resources in the community, like Create Campaign or Million Cups or EDE. There's a lot of resources in the community here at this point. So don't be afraid to seek out help as you get going.
Well, again, we cannot thank you all enough for your time and attention. On the screen, you all will be able to see the areas of practice that Danielle and Zach practice within, as well as their email addresses. Feel free to connect with those who are, again, wanting to provide great information and resources to those who are with the Create campaign. We certainly appreciate it, and we thank you for this gift of time that you all have given us for this webinar. With that being said, we're going to officially sign off. Again, thank you all and have a great day.